The 66th session of the Commission on the Status of Women must agree on practical measures to enhancing women's leadership in all areas, particularly in the context of climate change. That was the opening message from South Africa's ambassador to the United Nations, Mathu Joyini, in her capacity as chair of the session for the next 2 years. The UN Secretary General echoed the sentiment, warning that climate change was exacerbating conflict around the world. This is disproportionately affecting women and girls. Guterres again called for gender equality to be at the heart of a renewed social contract that is fit for today's societies and economies.
I call to order the second meeting of the 66th session of the Commission on the Status of Women.
This year's hybrid session of the UN's largest gathering on women's empowerment and gender equality officially underway in the context of climate change, environmental and disaster risk reduction policies and programs.
This year's priority theme could not have been more timely. As stated in the Secretary General's report, gender inequality coupled with climate change, environmental degradation and disasters is the greatest sustainable development challenge of the present time. Environmental degradation and the negative impacts of climate change affects society as a whole, but particularly women and girls' poverty, health and livelihoods. These impacts are strongest on rural and indigenous women and girls, those in vulnerable and marginalized situations, and those in conflict settings.
With the effort here to make strides among member states in terms of gender-responsive policies on climate change, with the Commission positioned as the foremost intergovernmental body on gender equity and empowerment across all sectors.
The Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action commits states to ensure that women and girls can exercise their full human rights and fundamental freedoms safely and free from prejudice. Yet women and girls continue to be denied equal access to land and natural resources, finance, technology, knowledge, mobility, and other assets. This leaves them more vulnerable to the impacts of climate and environmental crises and disasters.
The UN chief warned that the Paris Climate Change Agreement would not be realized without the full and equal participation and leadership of women.
Women and girls continue to be largely excluded from the rooms where decisions are taken. Women and girls living in small island nations, least developed countries, and places affected by conflict are impacted most of all. Women suffer when local natural resources, including food and water, come under threat and have fewer ways to adapt. The environmental crises and extreme weather, like droughts and floods, disproportionately affect the nutrition, incomes, and livelihoods of women farmers. There is increasing evidence that child marriage and exploitation are linked with the climate crisis. And when climate disasters strike, as they do with increasing frequency, research shows that women and children are up to 14 times more likely than men to die.
The new head of UN Women called on member states to implement what had already been agreed and create gender action plans where gaps exist.
The world is on fire. Its impact every corner of our globe and threatens peace, food security and sustainable development from the Pacific to the Arctic. As with all crises, climate change also exacts its highest price from women and girls.
The scene set for the next 2 weeks of negotiations. Member states will at the end of this session adopt a set of agreed conclusions that will seek to address gaps in placing women and girls at the centre of climate change mitigation within the green economy, within institutions that address the growing challenges around natural disasters, and through greater training and support, by building resilience through increasing women's economic empowerment and access to resources, and in so doing, remove barriers that limit the critical role women must play in a sustainable future for the planet. Sherman Briceby's SABC News, New York.